The sound was never meant to be heard by human ears. It was captured accidentally, buried deep within raw seismic data, an anomaly flagged by software designed to detect earthquakes. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, a low-frequency signal beneath the Euphrates River basin. But when analysts isolated it, slowed it down, and removed the surrounding noise, something unsettling emerged. It was rhythmic. Not chaotic like tectonic stress, not sharp like fracturing rock. This signal pulsed with deliberate intervals, a slow rise, a pause, a fall, then repetition, over and over again, as if something below the earth was not only moving, but waiting. Geophysicists were quick to rule out conventional explanations. There was no recorded seismic activity in the region, no drilling, no underground water movement that could account for the pattern. The signal did not behave like a natural process. It behaved like intent. As the data circulated quietly among specialists, a separate and far more visible change was taking place above ground. The Euphrates River was disappearing. Once one of the most powerful rivers in human history, it had sustained entire civilizations, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon. For thousands of years, it had flowed uninterrupted, a constant artery of life through the ancient world. Now it was drying up. Satellite imagery showed long stretches of exposed riverbed. Cracked mud replaced flowing water, entire sections reduced to dust and stone. Climate explanations were offered: drought, mismanagement, upstream dams, but even experts admitted the speed of the retreat was unusual. To those who lived nearby, it felt wrong. Villagers spoke of an unnatural stillness. Animals refused to approach the dry channel. At night, some claimed they could feel vibrations beneath their homes, subtle but persistent, like distant thunder with no storm. And for those familiar with ancient texts, the location carried a far heavier weight. In the book of Revelation, chapter 9, verse 14, a single line stands out. "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." For centuries, the passage was treated as symbolic, a metaphor within apocalyptic literature. But the word translated as bound comes from a term meaning restrained, confined, held in place, imprisoned. As the river receded, some began to ask an uncomfortable question. If the Euphrates was the binding point, what happened when the binding was removed? It was during this period, when the riverbed lay exposed for the first time in recorded history, that a joint expedition was assembled. Officially, their mission was archaeological preservation. With the water gone, ancient structures long buried beneath silt and flow were vulnerable to erosion and looting. The team was composed of geologists, archaeologists, and structural specialists. They were experienced, rational, grounded in data. None of them expected what they would find. Several kilometers into the riverbed, ground-penetrating radar began returning distorted readings. At first, it was dismissed as interference caused by uneven sediment, but the distortions repeated in the same location. When the team investigated on foot, they discovered a fissure, not a crack, a rupture, a massive opening in the earth where the river once flowed, perfectly circular, clean-edged, descending straight down into darkness. There was no debris field, no signs of collapse. The surrounding ground looked compressed, as if something had pushed upward from below rather than fallen inward. Depth estimates were impossible from the surface. Light disappeared quickly into the shaft, swallowed by blackness. The geologists were the first to voice concern. The formation did not match any known erosion pattern. The archaeologists noted something even stranger.
markings along the upper walls, barely visible from above, carved into the stone. Not decorative, not structural, intentional. Word spread quickly among the nearby villages, and just as quickly, the locals refused to go near it. Elders warned the site was cursed. Shepherds rerouted their flocks miles out of the way. Even during daylight, no one would approach the fissure alone. Some claimed the ground around it was warm. Others said the air carried a bitter smell that made them dizzy. At night, the area was completely abandoned. The scientists were left on their own. They camped near the site, working under the harsh sun and colder than expected nights. Equipment functioned normally at first, but unease grew with each passing day. Instruments occasionally glitched without explanation. Batteries drained faster than expected. Audio monitors registered faint interference even when no equipment was active. Still, they pressed on. Before any descent could be attempted, the team agreed to conduct a preliminary acoustic survey. A specialized microphone, designed for subterranean mapping, was lowered on a reinforced cable. At shallow depths, the recording was empty. Wind, static, silence. Then, far below, something changed. The signal returned. Low, steady, rhythmic. The same pattern detected weeks earlier by seismic sensors, now clearer, closer, undeniable. As the microphone descended, the sound grew stronger, and then, abruptly, the cable went slack. It had reached something solid. The scientists exchanged glances. No one spoke, because in that moment, standing alone on a dry riverbed that had not seen daylight in thousands of years, they understood a single, chilling truth. Whatever was producing that sound was not buried by accident. It had been placed there, and the river that once sealed it was gone.
The descent began under protest from every instrument they carried. As the first geologist eased over the edge of the fissure, the temperature spiked sharply. What had been dry desert air above became thick and oppressive within seconds. Heat rose from below in slow waves, carrying with it a smell that forced several team members to pause and adjust their respirators. Sulfur, and something sharper beneath it, ozone. The unmistakable scent of electrical discharge, as if the air itself were under strain. The rope slid steadily through gloved hands as they rappelled deeper into the shaft. Light from the surface diminished rapidly, swallowed by darkness that seemed to absorb illumination rather than reflect it. Headlamps cut narrow cones through the black, revealing walls that were far too smooth for any natural formation. This was not a collapse. It was a passage. As they descended, the heat became nearly unbearable. Sweat soaked through protective gear. Breathing grew labored. The rock around them radiated warmth, as though the earth itself were alive, circulating, pulsing. At approximately 30 meters down, the first markings appeared. At first, they were mistaken for mineral veins, faint lines etched into the stone, following curved paths. But as more of the wall came into view, the truth became impossible to ignore. These were carvings, deep, deliberate, repeating. They were not Egyptian hieroglyphics, not Sumerian cuneiform, not Akkadian, Hittite, or any known proto-language. There were no pictographs, no representations of animals, gods, or people. Instead, the symbols followed a different logic. Circular forms intersected by straight lines, angular breaks disrupting otherwise smooth patterns. Sets of 4 repeated again and again, spiraling downward along the shaft walls. The archaeologists recognized the structure immediately, even if they could not name the origin. These were not warnings. They were restraints. Sigils designed to bind, to confine, to apply pressure not to intruders, but to whatever lay beyond them.
The carvings faced inward, their orientation unmistakable. They were never meant to be seen from above. They were meant to keep something in. As the team descended further, equipment began to fail. Flashlights flickered without warning, plunging sections of the shaft into total darkness before sputtering back to life. Digital compasses spun uselessly. Magnetic readings fluctuated wildly, as if the field itself was unstable. A drone was deployed to scout ahead. It dropped less than 10 meters before its feed dissolved into static, the connections severed abruptly, the drone vanishing into the black below, without so much as a crash echoing back. There was no sound of it hitting the bottom. That absence unsettled them more than any noise could have. Communications between team members became distorted. Voices crackled through headsets, warped and delayed, as though the sound itself was struggling to move through the air. One scientist reported hearing whispers beneath the static, an observation quickly dismissed, then quietly noted. The magnetic field down there was wrong, not weakened, distorted. It bent signals, drained power, disrupted orientation. Instruments that had been calibrated hours earlier now produced contradictory data. The laws they relied on still functioned, but imperfectly, as if applied to a place they were never meant to operate. When the first boots finally touched the bottom, there was no sense of relief. The chamber below was vast, but not open. The walls curved inward, creating a claustrophobic enclosure despite its size. The heat was suffocating. The air vibrated faintly, too subtle to hear at first, but strong enough to be felt through the soles of their boots. The hum was still there, low, constant, alive. They moved quickly, driven by instinct more than procedure. Audio equipment was assembled near the center of the chamber. Microphones were anchored to the stone, recording devices activated. For a moment, just a moment, there was only silence. Then the hum deepened. The vibration intensified, traveling through the chamber like a pressure wave. Dust lifted from the floor, hovering briefly before settling again. The walls began to resonate, the sigils along the walls catching the light in unsettling ways, as if responding. What had been a low-frequency presence transformed. The hum fractured. It became a grinding sound, slow at first, then accelerating. A metallic roar echoed through the chamber, layered and uneven, as if massive mechanisms were shifting far below the stone. And beneath it, voices. Not speech, not language, a chorus of overlapping tones, rising and falling, slipping in and out of synchronization, some high, some impossibly low, none of them human. The recording level spiked violently. One microphone overloaded and shut down. Another continued to transmit, its feed distorted by the sheer intensity of the sound. Panic spread through the team. One scientist tore off their headset, screaming that something had spoken their name. Another dropped to their knees, clutching their head as the vibration intensified, rattling teeth and bone. The grinding grew louder, closer. The chamber seemed to contract, the air thickening as if compressed by an unseen force. The sigils along the walls began to crack, not breaking, but straining, hairline fractures racing through the ancient carvings. The bindings were under stress. Orders were shouted. The ascent was called immediately. Equipment was abandoned. Recordings continued till the final second before evacuation. As the team scrambled back towards the rope, the sound reached its peak, a deafening convergence of metal, stone, and voice that overwhelmed every sense. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No hum, no vibration, no echo. Only the sound of terrified breathing and the realization that whatever had been responding had chosen to stop, not because it was gone, but because it had finished listening.
What followed the expedition was not celebration, nor disbelief. It was containment. The recordings were transferred to a secured laboratory environment far from the river. Multiple copies were made, each handled by separate teams to prevent contamination of analysis. The scientists involved did not speak publicly. Several declined interviews altogether. Those who did would only describe the sound using clinical language, as if precision could protect them from its implications. The first step was filtration. Layers of low-frequency noise were isolated, mechanical interference removed, geological harmonics stripped away. What remained should have been meaningless residue, acoustic debris without structure. Instead, it organized. As analysts slowed the recording further, patterns emerged: repetition, cadence, stress points that repeated at exact intervals. Linguists were brought in, then dismissed. Cryptographers followed, then experts in ancient phonetics. None of them recognized the language, but all agreed on one thing: this was not random noise. It was a chant. When the waveform was mapped visually, the structure became undeniable. Call and response patterns, a dominant voice layered beneath others, a rhythm consistent with ritualized speech rather than communication. Not conversation, but proclamation. The final breakthrough came when a comparative model was applied, not to known languages, but to liturgical structures, invocation forms, binding and unbinding sequences. What the team discovered next forced the analysis into classified territory. The chant translated, not word for word, but conceptually, into a declaration. The barrier is broken. The hour has come. There was no ambiguity in the phrasing, no poetic uncertainty. This was not a warning or a threat. It was an announcement. To understand its weight, one must return to the text that first drew attention to the Euphrates. Revelation chapter 9. The passage is often skimmed, misunderstood, reduced to metaphor. But within biblical scholarship, it is one of the most specific timelines in apocalyptic literature. It does not describe chaos unleashed indiscriminately. It describes a release, scheduled, intentional, and delayed. The entities bound at the Euphrates are not described as ordinary demons. They are not tempters, not wandering spirits. They are restrained until a precise moment. The text states they are prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year. This language is surgical. It implies coordination, rank, authority. These beings are often referred to imprecisely as angels, but the term in context denotes status, not allegiance. They are commanders, generals, figures of leadership within a fallen hierarchy. Ancient commentaries refer to them as kings. 4 of them, not symbolic, not interchangeable. 4 distinct entities, each associated with power, dominion, and control over destruction rather than deception. They are not tasked with corrupting humanity, but with executing judgment when restraint is removed. Their imprisonment is unique. Unlike other fallen entities, they are not active in the world. They are not roaming. They are bound, confined to a specific location tied to geography, not just the spiritual realm. The Euphrates. For centuries, theologians debated why that river mattered, why a physical location was named when so much of Revelation is abstract, why these entities were not sealed in the abyss or cast out entirely. The answer, some scholars now argue, lies in the role of the river itself. Water has long been associated with separation, with boundaries, with barriers between realms. In ancient Near Eastern thought, flowing water was not just life-giving, it was containing, a natural seal. The Euphrates was not merely symbolic, it was functional. As long as the river flowed, it covered, compressed, and concealed what lay beneath it.
The water served as a physical anchor for a spiritual restraint, a constant pressure, a lid. But rivers are not eternal. As the Euphrates dried, something unprecedented occurred. The physical seal weakened, the barrier thinned. What had been submerged was exposed not only to light, but to influence. The chains described in Revelation were never just metaphorical. They were layered. Spiritual restraint reinforced by physical conditions. Remove one, and the other begins to fail. This reframes the recording entirely. The chant was not an attempt to escape. It was recognition that escape was no longer necessary. The barrier is broken. The hour has come. The fissure beneath the riverbed was not a breach caused by erosion. It was a symptom, a pressure response, a sign that containment was failing from within as much as from without. And the timing is what troubles scholars most. Revelation does not describe a gradual release. It describes a moment, an appointed time when restraint is lifted and authority is returned. The recording suggests that moment may no longer be future tense. If the water was the final physical lock, and if that lock has been removed, then what remains are chains without anchors, and chains, when they lose their foundation, do not break all at once. They grind, they strain, and eventually they come loose. What the scientists heard beneath the Euphrates was not awakening, it was readiness. And according to the text that has haunted this river for nearly 2,000 years, readiness is the final stage before release.
The release does not announce itself with a single explosion. It begins as a vibration. Seismographs across the world register it within minutes, anomalous tremors with no epicenter, rippling simultaneously through continents that should have no connection. Fault lines awaken where there is no pressure. Deep ocean sensors record pulses traveling against currents. Satellites detect fluctuations in the planet's magnetic field, brief but global. The ground itself reacts. Cities thousands of miles from the Euphrates feel it as a shudder beneath concrete and steel. Power grids flicker. Animals panic. Air traffic is briefly disrupted as instruments misread altitude and orientation. Something has changed, not locally, globally. According to the ancient text, this is the moment restraint ends. The four entities bound for millennia are released, not slowly, not partially, but completely. The chains described in Revelation do not snap in silence. They give way under strain, their failure sending a signal through realms humanity cannot perceive. And with that release comes command. Revelation 9 does not describe these beings as solitary agents. Their role is not to act alone, but to lead, to unleash something prepared long before human history reached its current age, an army. The number given is precise, 200 million, not an estimate, not symbolic language, a figure stated plainly as if meant to be remembered. John, writing in the 1st century, had no frame of reference for an army of that size. Even the greatest empires of his time could not field a force remotely comparable. And yet he insists on the number, repeating it for emphasis, 200 million. What follows is one of the most vivid and unsettling descriptions in all of apocalyptic literature. He calls them horsemen, but what he describes does not behave like cavalry. The beings are mounted, yet the mounts themselves are alive, or something like it. Their heads resemble lions, not in symbolism, but in form, expressions of dominance, aggression, and predatory force. From their mouths pour smoke, fire, and sulfur, not metaphorical flames, but elements associated with destruction, suffocation, and chemical death. Their tails are described as serpents, living extensions capable of striking, not passive, not decorative, weapons in their own right. These creatures do not wield swords or spears. They are the weapons. The text states that by these three, fire, smoke, and sulfur, 1/3 of humanity is killed, not wounded, not conquered, removed. The scale is staggering. The speed implied is worse. This is not a slow war of attrition. It is a cascade, a sweeping event that alters population, infrastructure, and the psychological stability of the world in a compressed span of time. For centuries, readers assumed the description must be symbolic, that John was encoding meaning through imagery familiar to his era. But modern scholars have revisited the text with new questions. Was this a supernatural invasion, or was John witnessing something he could not understand and describing it with the only language available to him? Some point to the horses and see machines, armored vehicles moving across land, tanks with turrets like heads, exhaust plumes resembling smoke and fire, tails that strike, missile systems, chemical dispersal, autonomous weaponry. Others look to the air, helicopters, gunships, the roar of engines mistaken for beasts, the sulfurous stench of fuel and explosives. The number 200 million has also been re-examined. In the modern age, such a force is no longer impossible. Standing armies, reserves, and mechanized units combined across global alliances could, in theory, reach such a scale. But this interpretation raises its own problems. John does not describe nations. He does not name kings, borders, or banners. He describes obedience. These horsemen move as one, no dissent, no variation, no hesitation. They are deployed with unified intent, answering to authority not rooted in human command structures. And then there is the timing. The army appears only after the release of the four bound entities. It does not precede them. It does not cause their release. It follows it, as if waiting. This has led some scholars to a more unsettling conclusion, that the army was not assembled by humanity at all, that it existed in some form, beyond human perception, held in reserve, restrained, and dormant until the correct authority was restored. The four kings, once released, do not create chaos, they activate it. The destruction described is not indiscriminate. It targets life on a scale that reshapes civilization. The text emphasizes that the survivors do not repent, not because they are ignorant, but because the event feels like a judgment. Whether interpreted as literal creatures, advanced warfare, or a convergence of both, the result is the same. 1/3 of humanity is gone. The world that remains is altered beyond recognition. And the most chilling detail is not the number. It is the implication that this was never spontaneous. The army was prepared. The leaders were bound. The release was scheduled. And according to the chain of events that began beneath a drying river in the Middle East, that schedule may no longer be theoretical. What John saw, whatever its true nature, was not chaos erupting from nowhere. It was something ancient, restrained for a purpose, finally being allowed to move.
There is a detail in the text that is often overlooked. It is quiet, almost gentle, easily missed beneath the thunder of judgment and the terror of what is unleashed. But it is there, placed deliberately at the beginning of the destruction, like a lock hidden inside a storm. Revelation 9, verse 4. Before the army advances, before the fire and smoke, before 1/3 of humanity is struck, a command is given. They are told not to harm the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. This is not poetic imagery. It is a restriction. Even in the midst of chaos, there is a boundary that cannot be crossed. The beings released are powerful, ancient, terrifying, but they are not sovereign. They do not act on impulse. They operate under authority, and that authority includes limits. They are forbidden to touch those who are sealed. The question then becomes unavoidable. What is the seal of God? It is not a visible mark. It is not a symbol burned into skin. It is not something taken, implanted, or enforced. The seal of God is described elsewhere in Scripture as belonging to those who belong to Him, those who are known, those who are His. In theological terms, it is faith. More precisely, it is the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, a spiritual identity that cannot be forged or stolen, a declaration not made by words alone, but by relationship. Where the world fixates on the mark of the beast, on fear, control, and loss of autonomy, the seal of God is the opposite. It is not imposed, it is received, not through terror, but through trust. It does not enslave, it protects. This distinction matters because fear has always been the enemy's favorite weapon. Fear narrows vision. Fear isolates. Fear convinces people they are alone when they are not. The text does not end with annihilation. It ends with separation. Those who are sealed are not spared because they are stronger, smarter, or better prepared. They are spared because they are known. And nothing in the account suggests that this protection is fragile. The monsters described in Revelation 9 do not test the seal. They do not challenge it. They recognize it instantly and obey the restriction without exception. That alone should give pause. This investigation began with a sound, a recorded anomaly beneath a drying river, a rhythmic presence that defied geological explanation. That sound led to a fissure. The fissure led to carvings. The carvings led to a chant, and the chant led back to a text written nearly 2,000 years ago. The Euphrates River is drying. That is not speculation. It is observable fact. The recordings exist. The expedition happened. The interpretations remain debated, but the convergence is undeniable. A physical seal has been removed. A spiritual warning long dismissed as metaphor now reads like a timetable. And yet, embedded in the same text that describes devastation on a global scale is a promise of protection that is deeply personal. The message is not that destruction is inevitable for all. It is that choice still matters. In ancient times, watchmen were placed on city walls. Their role was not to cause panic, but to see clearly, to stay awake, to warn, to guide people toward safety before danger arrived at the gates. That is the role this channel exists to fill, not to sensationalize fear, not to predict dates, but to pay attention. If you are watching this, you are not doing so by accident. Curiosity is often the first step towards awareness, awareness towards preparation, preparation towards peace. The seal of God is not something to fear losing. It is something to recognize you already have, or to seek while there is still time. The river is dry. The sounds are real. The warnings are ancient, and the future is closer than most people realize. If you choose to stay alert, to stay informed, and to stand among those who watch rather than sleep, then join this community. Subscribe, stay connected, speak up. And if you understand where your protection comes from, if you stand in that confidence, declare it. Write the words, "I am sealed," not as a spell, not as a superstition, but as a reminder to yourself and to others that fear does not get the final word. The question that remains is not whether these things will unfold. It is this: when the earth shakes and the seals are broken, will the world recognize what has been released, or who
has already been claimed.